Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, and I'm very sorry I couldn't be there in person. We just couldn't make the dates work, unfortunately, so yeah, hopefully this works all right for the second best.
Well, I'm afraid to say it's your loss because we're in a room with the most magnificent wallpaper you could imagine. It's straight out of the 1940s. It's fantastic.
Oh, wow.
So the room itself would have been worth the journey, but I hope the new term's treating you kindly.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, is the correct answer. Well, look, thank you very much for giving your time. It is genuinely appreciated. As you well know, I'm sure you've read behind the drivers for the Democracy Commission. As someone who's independent, I'm deeply impressed that Kirklees have been proactive enough to actually bring together the Commission and actually initiate it. Not only just in context of what's happened over the summer with the European Union referendum and that general sort of politicised nature of society that we experience at the moment, but also, in terms of what's happening in terms of reform of constitutional architecture of the United Kingdom and of England. And I think particularly what's happened in the last couple of years. One of the things that has been evident is that central government and those often signing the devolution deals haven't really thought through the implications and its impact on local government and on local authorities. And I think that in some ways, Kirklees hosting this commission is the correct response. And I think that it is coming from the bottom up, so to speak, gives it added interest and agency. And in that sense, thank you very much for giving your time this morning. It's genuinely appreciated.
No, I'm very happy to be involved. It sounds like you're doing something really interesting and important.
Well, that is yet to be seen, but we hope so. I think it's probably the polite way of putting it. But in the context of that, what we've been doing over the summer is engaging with the citizens across Kirklees through various forms, and we've been holding stakeholder engagement inquiries, both in London and here in Kirklees, with a wide range of stakeholders. And the idea is that we will be continuing this process till the end of October, and then we will be locked away in a room until we can release the white smoke with a draft report which will have some recommendations. We're very keen, by the way, to make sure that this is a conversation rather than we simply have a one-off engagement with all the people that give their time to the Commission. And in that sense, we will be sending the draft report to yourself for comment, and we'd be very grateful if you could, if you feel like you have the time and interest, if you would feed back on the conclusions that we draw and some of the recommendations. I think it's interesting. I've just been travelling over from Manchester and bumped into a couple of people decanting from Liverpool, clearly coming back from the Labour conference. And what we've seen in Liverpool over the last few days is yet another example of the tensions and opportunities that are emerging between representative and participatory democracy. Two different conferences almost for offering two different forms of democracy. And in many ways, our work is looking at that tension in the context of local and regional devolution. And I just wonder whether, just to start off, you might, offer a few thoughts on the current tensions that are emerging between that encouragement of representative democracy and participatory democracy in local government.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, I think we perhaps better set the Labour Party to one side in its current dilemmas and issues. But yeah, thinking more broadly, and I'll be reflecting, my comments will broadly reflect on the findings that we got from our 21st Century Councillor research, which was conducted with interviewing councillors across the northwest of England earlier this year. And clearly, we didn't speak to citizens, and that's a limitation of what I'm going to say, but I'm sure you've got other channels, and you've clearly done your own work, engagement work, in terms of sort of citizens' perspective. So my this is what I bring more is that sort of conversation with councillors, which I'm sure getting from other channels. But clearly, we can't resolve the tensions between representative and participatory democracy. They will all continue to be in dynamic tension as they have been for centuries. It's about thinking about the fit between them and trying to get the kind of cogs meshing rather than clashing with each other, and thinking about ways best to do that. And I think there's all sorts of new opportunities or opportunities that are sort of currently being explored around more participative approaches. So that obviously can be through consultation, what we might call sort of participatory democracy. There's clearly lots of new technologies which facilitate that, and which some local authorities have clearly been engaging with very proactively. There's opportunities to be more participative around service delivery, so sort of service co-production, co-creation agendas, citizens becoming more involved in running local parks, volunteering in local libraries, that kind of role of participation that can sit reasonably comfortably, I think, alongside representative democracy. I think the challenge that representative democracy has is that it's by its nature quite hierarchical. It involves a sort of cadre of experts who speak on behalf of citizens. And I think that's what the clash is, that some of the more participatory approaches are potentially more informal, more kind of humanising, and that councillors, if they're realistic and serious about wanting to engage in more participatory ways, can't sort of hide behind those sort of formal vestiges of office, if you will, but have to be willing to engage in a much more kind of open, human, interactive kind of way. I mean, something that I think is a great example of the potential for participatory work to link into city council is something like Birmingham Citizens, and I know there's other branches of the Citizens UK across England. And they are, I think, being very proactive in saying, right, we can have different kinds of models of democracy. We can take more kind of communitarian styles or more participatory styles of democracy and bring them to representatives who don't necessarily hear from those voices so powerfully, and we can seek to bring about change at that representative level, recognising that that is the formal channel to make policy change. And I know Birmingham citizens have been very actively trying to influence Birmingham City Council around a range of issues. I think shows the potential really for those sort of participatory approaches to engage with representatives rather than necessarily seeing them as sort of counterposed.
Well, that's very helpful. I must admit the Citizens UK example is a very good one, and one that we've been looking at ourselves. It does give us an alternative model in many senses. I've just realised that I've been rather rude in setting this off without allowing our three councillors to introduce themselves. So I just think it's probably better to just at this point, just for them to say hello.
Oh, great.
Hello, Catherine. It's Andrew Marchington. I think we met at the North West Employers meeting in Bolton earlier this year, when Carl, Eric and Firth and I came over.
Yeah, good to hear from you.
Hi Catherine, I'm Gemma Wilson, councillor elected last year and obviously member of the Commission.
Good morning Catherine, my name's Councillor Cathy Scott, I'm also a Commissioner.
Just to sort of take that on what you were saying, and I think you're right in the sense in which these tensions between the two forms are not resolvable in a sense, in a very neat way that often political scientists like to sometimes suggest. What it alludes to in many senses, and what's in your 21st Century Councillor report that came out, was that there is a changing role to the councillor itself, the councillor's role, both within their own wards, within their own communities, and within the representative institutions that they sit, is changing. I wonder whether you'd like to say a little bit more about how you feel that role is changing, and what are the drivers for that change?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose starting with the drivers, I think they're probably quite well known. They're obviously about the austerity agenda. They're around structural changes in local government, which has been partly as the executive backbench split, which is now not new anymore, obviously, but also the structural changes around public services with the greater use of outsourcing, and then most recently the structural change around the instruction of city regions and the devolution agenda. And then perhaps a broader, harder to define set of changes around different citizen expectations, the kind of deference, and the ways in which new technologies facilitate different kinds of conversations and different kinds of expectations of citizens. So I think those are some of the drivers that we identified in our report. And in terms of the roles, we identified several roles that we saw councillors undertaking. Obviously, not all councillors were undertaking all of these roles, that some pulling different directions. So I think some were undertaking what we call the sort of steward of place role, which is perhaps a more strategic role undertaken by those with a more executive role in the council, and about building partnerships with other third sector organisations, service providers, etc., to develop that support across the locality. We saw in relation to austerity that councillors were playing a role around partly being a buffer. Lots of our interviewees said that they were really trying to minimise the effect on constituents, but also being a sense maker, trying to translate for citizens, trying to communicate a better understanding of what a sort of slimmed down council can and would do for them, and why it was that certain kinds of key services were being withdrawn or slimmed back, so helping with that sort of sense-making role. And then there's something I think more practical around being what we call a catalyst, an entrepreneur, an orchestrator, which is about within communities getting out, being more actively involved in making things happen, not necessarily relying on formal, perhaps officer-led initiatives to make things happen. So working with community groups. I think it was a great example of this that we got when we were presenting 21st century councillor research in one of the local authorities near here. The council gave the example of a village which had bid for and won £25,000 to get a new upgraded play area, and this was in the time when money was slightly more readily available. A couple of years later, the neighbouring village had asked for the same money. That money was no longer available, and the local councillor had sort of said, well, we can't have that much money, but what can we get, and can we do this in a slightly different way? So he'd been down to the local woodyard and sourced some of the materials for doing it. He brought in local volunteer labour to help with the design and construction, and so they'd been able to put together a really nice looking play area for a fraction of the cost by just being a bit more creative and entrepreneurial around how it was done. So I think that's a good example of the sorts of roles that we heard about councillors undertaking.
That's enormously helpful. It is this sort of shift in some ways from being simply a representative to being a facilitator, a networker, an enabler, and in many ways adapting to the circumstances that councillors are operating in. I'd like to bring in Cathy here, Cathy Scott.
Yeah. Hi, Catherine. My question is to you. On your 21st century council report, you were looking at skills and competencies of councillors that we have. Is there any findings that you found that would better equip them? Because I'm finding as we're progressing with this investigation that one size does not fit all, and there's differentials in the size of authorities and citizens. So there's some that can articulate for themselves and some that won't. We need to be the voice of the people that won't. So my question is to you. Have you found that in your report any findings in that area that we can tap into?
Yeah, I mean, one of the frustrations that we found in doing the work, particularly perhaps in some of the officer work that we've done before, was a sense that things are put on for councillors, this is the perception, and then councillors don't attend. So there seems to be a sort of disconnect between the sort of member development, member training that's offered and the uptake. So part of the kind of what we wanted to do in the report was sort of hear more from councillors about that, and often, simply, prioritisation, difficulties around timings, but also a sense that some of the member development and training just simply wasn't useful to them. And so they were clearly very strategic in picking the things that would be helpful. In terms of what people said would be helpful, it was a mix of some of the more sort of traditional practical skills around chairing a meeting, speed reading, working these sort of data analysis type of work, but some of it was what we called in the report more sort of connective skills, more of the sort of working well with social media, being able to get engaged with citizens in different kinds of ways, and that partly I think we were a bit reluctant to just put that in a kind of media training box because of the feeling it was actually about having different kinds of conversations in different kinds of ways, and prioritising your time potentially in a different kind of way. And it wasn't just about knowing what buttons to press, but about actually thinking about how willing am I to be receptive to citizens on social media with the kind of expectations that creates of a bit of a sort of 24/7 type dialogue. And also we found that there was, I'm not sure that they necessarily asked for this in terms of skills training, but what we observed was that the sort of toll of being a councillor, just in terms of the constant demands, the sort of emotional toll, the dealing with abuse, did require you to be quite effective in reflective skills and ability to sort of cope with the emotional labour of the work. And we wondered whether there was an opportunity through member development to give councillors some more sort of coping skills that would equip them to do that. In terms of just the sort of practicalities, I think that the conclusion we drew was that it's best to get councillors as part of their induction when they're new, when they're keen, maybe when their calendars haven't filled up with other kinds of meetings, and that's the opportunity to really get some of this skills stuff embedded and perhaps get into the habit of attending skills training so that you don't see necessarily that low uptake of what does get offered.
Thank you.
Gemma.
Hi Catherine, I was just wondering about your findings or any conversations you might have had with councillors regarding cross-party working, particularly as the services, the nice-to-have services, if you like, are sadly going. I do think that actually means that we should be working more effectively cross-party without fear from our groups of perhaps being tarnished or the associated problems that go with that. When I was first elected, I will work with absolutely everybody. There's a few colleagues that I just can't sort of break, to be honest, to work with me. But the majority actually are really, really friendly and will work cross-party. But I did feel, and I continue to get hassle from my own group. And I probably shouldn't have said that because it's being recorded, but never mind, about my relationship with cross-party working. But actually, when you boil it down, a lot of the values and the ideas that we have are very, very similar, putting the drama and the theatre of the chamber aside. And I just wondered if you'd explored that at all, because I do think it's something completely vital. And I think councillors need to realise as well that the public don't necessarily care that much perhaps about what party you are locally if you're the person that actually helps them. I appreciate that that's perhaps a generalisation, but it is very much a personal vote, and I do think that actually you can increase your personal vote by actually working cross-party and not being seen to be this old-school politician that just wants to spat and go back to this, well, in 1927 your party did this kind of attitude. Sorry, I'm waffling now, I'll stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we found a huge variance, as you can imagine, in terms of the sort of political cultures in local authorities between those where there's been a tradition of cross-working and others where there was a real kind of entrenched sense of party lines and they could not be crossed. And we heard examples of officers having to deliver training 3 times in an evening to the 3 separate party groups because the groups were unwilling to come together around training because of not wanting to look weak or to be learning things in front of other people, which I was quite astonished by.
I have exactly
that. That kind of thing went on, but not everywhere, but we did hear those kind of stories. So I think the appetite for cross-party working is quite limited. I think I agree. I think you're right that the public are not necessarily that interested. They clearly want councillors that have strong links to the local area and speak for the local area, and that the party label may be less important. I think with the fracturing of sort of political landscape, some of the stuff that Andrew alluded to at the beginning, then some of the party labels are perhaps no longer adequate really at representing the different interests of the public, but that's a broader agenda perhaps which we should set to one side. The only difficulty, I think, around that more kind of open cross-party working comes to the accountability question. And I know accountability is something that you've been looking at, is that it does blur that accountability at election time. If there's been lots of cross-party working, it's obviously then harder to say, well, we did this and they did that, to give the sort of electorate a real choice. So obviously things are gained, but there might just be a loss of clarity around accountability. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yes, I do, to some extent, but I do think that a lot of the public perhaps do have the attitude of, I don't care who does it as long as it gets done. And I do actually think, even if you have, say, a ward made of members from different parties, that it's actually strengthened as a team if you're actually seen to be working together, because I think people expect you to be grown up and enough to be able to work with somebody from a different party in the same way that you'd work with someone who's perhaps, I don't know, clothing selection you didn't share, if that makes sense. And trying to get councillors to actually realise that, a situation, for example, I find ridiculous is when you have an officer meeting some councillors and then meeting the same councillors to discuss meeting another set of councillors to discuss exactly the same thing, when actually officers' time is really limited, and that officer and the councillors could actually be spent doing things more proactively. I just wondered if there was anything we could actually encourage do you think, particularly as we're looking at introducing new candidates and new councillors, to actually make people realise that a certain amount of cross-party working is really healthy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that really, about quite how you incentivise people. I mean, I suppose slightly speculative, but if we look at the direction that the Labour Party is taking, it's potentially moving further to the left. It's likely perhaps that the sort of tribal identities will become more entrenched rather than less, certainly in some local parties with risks around the selection of MPs. I agree with you that I think the public don't mind who does it as long as it gets done, but I don't know how receptive local parties really are to that message.
Thank you.
I suspect there's always going to be a certain element of partisanship in any form of democracy, which is always going to be evident.
Well, Catherine might want to comment on this, but despite that we're local councillors, local politicians, it is very different. There's still a very different culture of how we engage with communities. So being a liberal, actually growing up, inherited of street politics in Liverpool in the 1960s, which is the way we do it. That's just bread and butter, and I think that's not always the background that people have come from. So.
Yeah, of course.
Right, just to sort of move on slightly, thank you very much for that, by the way. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the engagement that we've had with the general public in Kirklees and some of the themes that have come up. And one of the things which seemed to be quite prevalent was this sense in which not all councillors are effective in engaging with their communities, that they don't resonate, and that some citizens feel that there is a lack of consistency in that sense of engagement. And I just wondered, through the 21st Century Council Commission that you held yourself, what you think of this perspective, and whether there was anything that you found that could be done to address this problem.
Yeah, I suppose there's different ways into addressing that problem, because I agree, I think we very much found, or we've perhaps inferred from our interviews with councillors the same conclusion. Partly it's recognising, it's helping councillors to recognise that engagement with communities needs to be multi-channel. One of the comments somebody gave, somebody mentioned, was that councillors are either really into Twitter, never off it, or they don't touch it at all. And actually, we need to recognise that there's no point, embracing Twitter so much that you don't do anything else, because actually that's not going to work for lots of your residents. So it's being able to develop that multi-channel response where you can engage with people. That's partly the sort of visibility on the street, partly through traditional sort of casework or surgeries, albeit whether they work better in a local supermarket or wherever. But being visible to the multiplicity of needs and experiences in the community, which is not to say you either just do a surgery or you just do Twitter, but trying to engage broadly. And I'm not sure, clearly some councillors have an appetite for one mode of engagement over another, and I think it would be really useful for them to sort of reflect on who gets left behind if they just undertake one main form of engagement. I think it's clearly an issue around sort of recruitment and retention, who becomes a councillor, how we encourage councillors that are more reflective of their communities, and that might help, I think, in terms of being more approachable to people within the community who perhaps wouldn't necessarily see their councillor as somebody that they could approach. So there's a whole lot of issues there I know that you're looking at around how we diversify the recruitment, and not just the recruitment but also the retention. So we know that that women who go into to be councillors don't necessarily are less likely than men to stay on for a second term. So how can we deal with some of the issues, or find out more about the issues that are making women councillors decide this is not the job for them?
That's That's very, very useful, thank you. Just to sort of move that on, I'll bring Andrew in a second. If you think about that sense of engagement, some of the suggestions that we've had are that there may be a minimum requirement introduced, that there could be a certain set of, rather loose, but requirements that all councillors need to meet. What would you suggest to that proposition that, in terms of engagement, councillors should have a certain minimum requirement?
I think that through the induction process, that can be very useful to set norms and to be clear about what the expectations are. Because clearly councillors are coming at the job from a very different set of places. Some will be retired, most will be retired, but some will be combining it with working life or with a young family. So there has to be some flexibility, but I think also some clear norms around expectations. I think that does sound like a sensible way to go in terms of being clear about that. But I suppose recognising again that councillors have different kind of appetites around the ways that they want to engage, and it may be useful to have quite a mixed portfolio of councillors, particularly if you have multi-member wards. I know they're kind of going out of fashion, but it can be useful to have people who engage in different kinds of ways rather than everybody just doing the same.
Yes, that's come through very strongly in a lot of our work, that one of the strengths of local government is that the fact that we get such a wide range of people being involved as councillors. Andrew?
Yeah, it's following on from that, but also the skills thing. One of the things you've put in your report about developing council skills, and one council leader commenting people needing those more entrepreneurial skills, and just the feeling you get that if you've got those skills, the last thing you want to be is a councillor. But actually I did make a comment at one of our meetings. Actually, being a cabinet member is the best job I've ever done. I had a very fulfilling career in teaching, but that ability to bring things together. And Kathy's been a cabinet member as well; she'd probably echo that. But how do you attract people? What's the potential way of attracting people to be a councillor? Apply those skills when there might be other attractive occupations where they could apply those skills.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think what we'd heard from the people we interviewed was make it easier to combine with paid work. Would be a way to bring in as people with different, potentially people at a different place in life, people with slightly different skill sets, perhaps. That generally it was seen by the councillors as a job that fits very well for a retiree and doesn't particularly work well for anyone else. So I think getting a different group of people in there might be about saying that some people might want to do this at different points in their life, and how can we make sure that it's that the role fits that. So that's, I suppose, about changing the role. Quite what you do locally to sort of get the word to the sorts of people might think would make a good contribution as councillors. That's a more challenging question. I don't really have a clear answer to that.
Sorry, Catherine, I'm just going to...
Yeah, Catherine, one of the problems I have out there is people often confuse local councillors with their MP, and they feel further remote from central government rather than local government. They look on our local councillors, and particularly within my area, and I'm sure other councillors around this table will say to you, that we are in touch with our our residents. They do come to us, and they feel further remote from central government, and it's for me, we're the engine room of everything that happens. We make it possible for an MP to be where they are. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
Can I just widen that up, because it's a very important point that Kathy's raising there, which is, during our engagement, one of the things that has come up is that there is a real lack of understanding amongst many citizens about what councillors do, about what is local democracy, and that relationship between Westminster and the town hall, so to speak. I don't know if your own research sort of revealing that, and what we might be able to do about that knowledge deficit.
Yeah, clearly it's been an ongoing issue, and I think possibly it's getting worse. A few years ago you would have got your council magazine through the door saying, this is what we've been doing locally, taking a bit of ownership and, celebrating some of the things that were done by the council and raising the profile of councillors, and obviously lots of places have got rid of those for cost reasons. So the sort of channels of communication that the council have on a corporate level, I think, are potentially slimming down. scope for engagement with local schools. I'm sure you do that already, but I mean that's clearly a potentially receptive audience, and offering scope for placements and sort of experience that people in school can have of that kind of work is clearly one thing that you can do. I'm not sure that our councillors, I think partly our councillors raised more questions than answers to some of these issues. I mean, they certainly articulated the same frustrations, but they felt that they are tarred with the brush of being part of the political class, and take the flak for lots of things that are done in Westminster. I think the introduction of the city regions, I think certainly some people we interviewed are very doubtful about that, and felt that there might be further confusion amongst the public, and in fact that almost nothing has been done to really communicate to the public and educate them around what the devolution deals are and how they will affect them. And in fact, even backbench councillors don't really feel that they've been told lots of those things, let alone the public, so that there will be more scope for confusion around these different roles, and a less strong sense about, if you're out in a kind of, if you're away from the hub of the city region, which is the engine of growth, then how do you make sure that you can articulate and represent the interests of your area, which might be much more of a sort of declining industrial area, and you've got to worry about getting left behind. So in a way, I think we're moving to a position where these things will be more blurred rather than less.
So that sort of sense about regional devolution very much being about cities means that areas such as Kirklees, the citizens may feel that they're disconnected, disengaged from regional devolution, and they're not sure about what its positive implications are for them.
Absolutely, yes. So we spoke to councils on the fringes of the Liverpool area, on the fringes of the Manchester area, who felt that all the focus had been on the core city and economic development, and that actually lots of decisions would be made which were not to the benefit of their own locality.
No, that is interesting. I think that's a sense in which is coming out in our work, that there is a difference between those that are located within the metropolitan centres and then on the peripheries. But, thank you very much on that. We certainly are looking at those sort of educative things, and one of the things that's coming up is a sense in which simple knowledge transfer about local government isn't enough, that there is a need for people to, possibly at a younger age, to gain experience of that interaction or those interactions, and that experience may well be as much of an educator as simple civic education. Just to sort of move on, I realise that you need to go about 1:45, do you? Yeah, okay, right. So we have got a few of the things that we do need to cover, so if we're okay, we shall move on. And just move to another part of our work where we engage with the public. And I think probably the best way which you could describe some of the feedback we've had about local politicians is a sort of engaged scepticism. There is a sense of cynicism in some ways, which is not simply about local politicians, about the wider political class. In many ways, local politicians engender a greater sense of trust than others. But there is still a sense of cynicism there, and I think that comes out in your own work. And I'm just wondering whether you might want to comment on particularly this question of accountability. There was a sense about not only were councillors not accountable for their decisions, but also that in many ways that they weren't accountable in terms of their successes and achievements, that they weren't very good at transmitting them to citizens, and that citizens in many ways didn't feel that relationship nourished their sense of citizenship. I don't know whether you'd like to make any comment on that.
Yeah, there's clearly part of that's the communication point. I know councils try to do some of the kind of you said we did type of communications, which I suppose some people will pick up on. But it's clearly also underlying that is the greater sort of complexities around accountability that councils are increasingly having to speak for, defend services which they don't provide themselves. And if there's a street light that's out and it can't be fixed for 21 days, then that's that's a kind of difficult position for the councils to be in, to have to sort of defend that kind of decision. And the people that we spoke to generally felt that accountability was becoming more fragmented, that the growth of academies and free schools, for example, was further diluting their scope to really make a difference in their localities. And I think when we sent the draft report out to various people in the Northwest who we've been working with on the commissioning of the report, they sort of came back and said, well, people haven't said anything about integration. They're talking about things being more fragmented, but actually we're integrating, and people should be talking about that. But they weren't. Councillors, didn't feel that things were coming together. They felt that things were being pulled further apart. So the integration of health and social care, for example, to some more interviewees, we would see as a further moving away from local political channels of accountability for care services, because they would be subsumed within the health service. So I think all of these things are making accountability really, very difficult. And it's, as I say, not clear to me that we're moving in the right direction around thinking that city regions will improve the situation around accountability.
I'm just going to bring Jim in, but just to sort of take a point on that, did you get the sense that the councillors felt they were in some ways being disempowered through this process, that their role was being somehow hollowed out because of this?
Yeah, I think there was perhaps an intensification of the sort of in-group, out-group feeling, which is clearly part of the executive backbench divide, and possibly an eternal divide within local government. But that some people we interviewed had been active in the city region negotiations and felt part of it, although even they felt somewhat ambivalent, I think, about aspects of the deal and their own capacity as leaders to deliver on it. But the backbench councillors or councillors from those more sort of peripheries of the city regions, did feel, I think, very marginalised, and that they hadn't been part of those negotiations.
Interesting, very interesting. Sorry, Jan.
Thank you. Sorry, changing the subject slightly. Do you think there's a link between the perceived lack of accountability of councillors and the public's perhaps lack of understanding as to what councillors actually do? I remember I was speaking to a resident a while ago that genuinely felt that, or thought that councillors went to planning meetings, full council, and replied to emails, and that was the scope of the role, where obviously that's very, very different. So just wonder if people, for example, aren't following this commission and wouldn't actually know the fact that we've perhaps put 30 hours in this week, or will have done, into solely this commission, that people will perhaps feel that there is a lack of accountability because we're not seen to be doing anything.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. So it does keep coming back, I think, to that sense of how to make the public slightly more aware of the role that we're doing. I mean, I think we have the same thing at universities, is when you're not actually teaching, there's no real kind of sense of, well, what do you do with the rest of your job, and I don't think we're that good at sort of articulating it. And that sort of gets in the way, I think, of accountability to some of those sort of frontline people. So partly it's about, what can be done. So that is where something like Twitter does allow councillors, I guess, to check in a bit more with the public and their followers, in terms of, some people make their diary completely open, or at least, have that sort of drip feed of activities throughout the day, so that just gives that sense of the sort of the whole of what councillors are doing. So that can be the more of a real time, which perhaps adds to the sort of civic education aspects that we talked about earlier. But it's not an easy. I suppose there's educating the public more, but that in a way that makes it sound like it's the public's fault. And I think it's also about thinking what can we do as those who are elected representatives to communicate better about what it is that sort of spend your days doing.
Thank you.
It sort of scopes into a wider problem which has come up continually in both our public engagement and stakeholder engagement, which is about communication. And the problem isn't simply one for councillors; it's for councils to be able to better communicate with their citizens. It's quite clear that the old models are less effective, and I wonder whether, for your own work, you've seen good examples, or you've seen practices which have been less effective. In attempts to try and improve that communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it sounds a bit trite to say, but, some of the people that we interviewed, particularly for the officer work and 21st Century Public Servant report, we're expressing the sort of shared humanity with citizens, so engaging in ways that felt more kind of authentic and kind of a willingness to engage in ways that were not about hiding behind a role and a desk, but actually being able to be a bit more open and honest and transparent. And I think that is the sort of the norm that things like Twitter are supposed to sort of encourage, is that we are all a bit more kind of human and open, and that there's nothing worse than a kind of standard corporate feed, which is incredibly boring and no one follows. And I think there's some great examples in the Greater Manchester Police Force of quite a clever use of Twitter to engage really well with citizens and to get a really big following, partly by just being quite funny and human and open, and that then gets you a big following, which you can then use for police work, if it becomes necessary. They gave an example of, if a child goes missing, you've got a big group of people there who you can instantly get information out to, and you've got sort of 200,000 people being your eyes and ears on the street. So I think some people are able to use that kind of mechanism much more effectively. But clearly it's not all about Twitter. Some of the really impressive people that we spoke to were sort of neighbourhood managers in local offices who were really able to work, I think, quite creatively with local councillors to say, we know there's a sort of slight blurring of roles here between officers and councillors because we're both doing this sort of neighbourhood role, but how can we make sure that we work to really reinforce and support each other in that, rather than going for very strict demarcations, which potentially limits both roles.
That's very helpful in a way. I must admit, as a Greater Manchester citizen, I am very aware of the Greater Manchester Police, and they do adopt a very different tone in their communications, and I follow them. They are great. They occasionally get into trouble, but most often...
But that's a really important point, isn't it?
Well, most often they're forgiven for it because they genuinely, and they enrich the civic space, and I think that's true.
That's the sort of risk-taking point, isn't it? That the sort of that organisations end up with these really bland communications because of a desire not to offend anybody, not to be seen to be using public money to put out jokes on Twitter. But it's that you have to sort of have the risk-taking, and you have to sort of permit risk-taking, and you have to not stamp down on your officers if they send out a sort of funny tweet about something that seems a bit sort of close to the line, because you can't have that sort of sense of sort of genuine human communication unless you're willing to encourage people to take risks a bit more.
It's interesting. It's a question of the tone, that human tone, but also about using communication networks with other people to try and develop and reach, in some senses. Is that sort of what is you're arguing, I suspect? Andrew?
Yeah, some of the evidence we've heard is about modern technologies actually complementing existing skills, softer skills, people skills. So is that what we're saying with Manchester? So the Twitter in Manchester's helped to increase the reach, but you're still needing people out on the streets and talking to people face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it's clearly there's that sort of multi-channel thing. I know that's a bit jargony, but that sense of you need to have something that works for lots of different kinds of people.
So what do you mean by multi-channel? Is that?
Well, so multi-channel, as I say, a bit jargony. It sort of means using different kinds of forms of engagement. So it might mean using, if you're just online, it might mean using Twitter, Facebook, email. But I think for a councillor, I'd extend it to also mean that you're doing some face-to-face communication, you're available on the phone. So it's about having multiple ways in, multiple forms of engagement, or multiple media that can be used for engagement.
Yeah, I think it's probably really important for us that we're also in our community. Most of us live in the communities we represent, and actually, when people are talking to us on the bus or when we're out and about walking and things like that, because sometimes that's ignored. Again, it's that contrast between members of Parliament who are spending most of the time in London and those of us who are actually in our communities most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. But then I suppose also carving out a life that works for you, so that it doesn't take you 2 hours to get around the supermarket, because they're coming to you with everything that they want to talk through.
That's one of the joys. Although you can do your case while you're actually waiting at the checkout, so it sort of takes the boredom out of it sometimes.
Just to sort of move that, because all these sort of initiatives sort of, are placing the councillor at the core of this sort of changing role and the changing way in which they engage with their constituents. In some senses, it raises another question, which is how do local authorities themselves better support councillors and be able so they can become this more effective representative, to become advocates, become enablers, facilitators. I wonder if during your research you came to any conclusions on that.
Well, I mean, I suppose that's partly the kind of member development and training piece that we talked about earlier, is what can sort of, at an institutional level, can be done to support councillors to undertake those kinds of roles, to encourage councillors to be active in their sort of ward work, possibly using where multi-member wards exist, using those to ensure that the different members from a ward are engaging in different kinds of ways, potentially, if one's in the cabinet, for example. Yeah, so I'm not sure I have much to add to my point about the sort of getting that skills mix right and putting on training, and perhaps understanding from councillors why they don't come to training and what could be done at the point of induction or as on an ongoing basis to make training actually a good use of councillors' time.
So in many ways it is about supporting them to work more efficiently, to work more dynamically, and to be able to work possibly more autonomously. Would you suggest that is also an element of this?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's probably part of the risk-taking point as well, is that we have to, local party groups have to be willing for their members, potentially party working, more willing for their members to work in different kinds of ways, get on with some of that local problem solving.
That's interesting.
Have a national political resonance, so, I suppose there might be something that goes on very practically at a local level around using more volunteers in a local library, but politically might be seen as quite problematic because of links with trade unions and a feeling that this isn't an appropriate way to staff a library and to bring in expertise and secure jobs. So I completely recognise that there are some dilemmas here for party members.
No, that's enormously helpful. Thank you, Catherine.
Catherine, I'm just going to steer you slightly. It was looking at your 21st century report. Did any of the councillors report back to you one of the barriers and one of the concerns they had was safety? Their safety, because that's becoming a major issue that councillors are facing at the moment. We're used to just going out and being proactive in our communities. Now we feel that we've got to be extra careful because of this lone working, and we're needing to have, no doubt, put policies in place. So I just wondered if you had any feedback about people talking about safety issues.
People didn't actually. No, nobody that we interviewed spoke about their sort of concerns about their personal safety. People did talk about abuse via electronic channels, and for a lot of people that was clearly something that kept them away from the use of Twitter, the use of Facebook to engage with citizens. And I don't think some of the people who were active on it, I think, just accepted that you just have to sort of put a brave face on it and get on with it, because they didn't want to give up on those kind of channels altogether. But I certainly think we could do more around helping with sort of coping mechanisms around trolling and online abuse, because there is of course a danger that just makes the whole use of that technology inappropriate and very difficult. But no, actually, I suppose the issues about personal safety, clearly we see them in the NHS and in a range of service sectors, so I'm very aware of them, and perhaps it's surprising that none of our councillors mentioned them.
Right. Thank you, Catherine.
That is very interesting. One of the things that has been in the background of our work is thinking about the recruitment of councillors, the next generation of councillors in many ways, and we're very fortunate under the Commission we've got councillors of different experiences, both more established and newer councillors, and that's really enriched our work. I just wonder, during the 21st Century Council project, did you look at how councils can attract that next generation of councillors?
I mean, we certainly has got people's sense of, got our interviewees' sense of perhaps why areas where I've worked and areas where I haven't worked. Clearly, diversity is an ongoing issue that a lot of councils haven't cracked. I mean, something like all women shortlists were put forward as perhaps one very tangible example of where it has made a real difference in terms of improving the gender dynamics around diversity.
Are there any examples of councils that have actually brought in those quotas?
I believe so. I'd have to look back through the report and the interviewees to get a sense of where they were, because I'm certainly very aware of them in Westminster politics, but I can get back to you on on local examples of that.
That would be really helpful if you could. Yeah, I think that would be valuable.
And in terms of more broadly, I mean, something around the culture of local party groups, I think. Trying to understand more about why it is that women don't take on the roles or don't stay in the roles. I mean, I think, as in all sectors of public life, role modelling is really important, and to bring on a new generation of more diverse councillors, we clearly need to have exemplars in post that can help to, people think, imagine a mental image of a councillor. We clearly need that not to be, a retired white man, as I suspect it is now. What can do perhaps to raise the visibility of a more diverse group of councillors so that we can change that.
Your comment provoked a certain amount of wry smiles around some parts of the table.
We're all right with small doses.
I'll say, Catherine, that was one of the reasons I stood. I was studying for community governance and public sector management. And one of the reports I'd read was saying it was middle-aged, balding men, and I thought I needed to make a difference there.
Just feeding in on that, actually, it was actually sexism that didn't force me to stand, but made me want to stand. I was told that I was a stay-at-home mum with a bee in her bonnet, and then I had a patronising rub on my leg, and I was told that it was probably just my hormones because I just had a baby, and the chap that said that completely understood because his wife was hormonal when she had a baby. And when I left the meeting, quite graciously, given the circumstances, I was challenged, well, if you think you can do better, stand yourself. And I had a few white middle-aged men laugh at me, so I stood and am now elected because I just thought that's not the kind of person that should be elected. So I think we can also use it as a powerful tool, and actually have us seen as not just decoration or something there to make up the numbers, and actually that we're just as valuable as men.
Yeah. But I think that your example points out how resilient you have to be to sort of to don't take that response rather than just to go, oh my God, what a world! I would never want to be involved in that. And that's so that's why that really just like how far we've got to go. But I think the more people we've got in the room to do that the better it is. I mean, I know I've presented this work to a group of councillors in an area which has won lots of awards. It's just a district council, a smaller council, but won lots of awards for its performance and just raising the diversity issue to a group of retired white men, and then basically saying, well, we haven't got a problem here because we're a really good council, so whatever we're doing, it works. So we don't, if it ain't broke, we don't really want to fix it. And I think, well, it clearly is broke if this is your council profile, but there's a real, I think, as I'm sure you're aware yourself, not a feeling that this is necessarily all that important.
I think it is very important. I mean, that's the first thing. I mean, it's the first thing you notice, the balance on a committee or a meeting. But sometimes the dynamics of the electoral system is very difficult. So it's not just about getting people on the ballot paper; it's also getting them elected, and there's all sorts of other dynamics going on. I mean, it's probably not for this, but I mean that's some of the things we've talked about, the electoral system. And some looking at using single transferable vote in Scotland. I think Northern Ireland. I'm not sure if they do in Wales or not. And actually, whether or not that actually gives a greater diversity of candidates.
I just wonder. It definitely does. I think that's very well established. Given how many European countries use it, there's plenty of data available, and I think it's well known that first past the post incentivises a safe candidate in inverted commas. And that probably isn't the woman or somebody from an ethnic minority background.
No, that is interesting. We were talking to Robin Hambleton yesterday, and it's some interesting examples from overseas about different electoral systems. In your report, you use the phrase perma-austerity, which sort of sounds half like a hairdo. But do you think that has any impact on the sort of resonance of local government and the potential for attracting, talented the next generation of councillors into it, if they feel that it is in this atmosphere of perma-austerity?
Yes, I mean, I think the scope for local authority to be a real kind of dynamo of change in a locality is very much restricted, clearly by the financial context, and councillors saying that they're back to just to the statutory minimum and can barely even do that. And areas where things like environmental health are so decimated that really they can't undertake some of the sort of really basic safety aspects of the job, which is really very worrying. And I suppose there may be that there are some potential councillors for whom there's a challenge in that, and how do we run our cities in ways which do tap in more to the entrepreneurial skills of both councillors and also of officers and citizens, and do local governments completely differently. Maybe there's a group of people who want to come in on that basis, but I mean, it is, I think, a much more difficult sell when most of what I think that we've got a quote in our report, sort of cutting with least harm, is really the best that you can offer citizens.
Now that's enormously useful. We are realising we're drawing to the end of our time. If my fellow commissioners will accommodate me, I just want to hit you with a couple of quick-fire questions, which are slightly out of the remit of what we're talking about, but as a political scientist, I'm sure you'll have a view. The first is on election cycles. We've been looking at whether Kirklees should maintain its 3 and 4 approach, or whether it should go for all-out 4 or even 5-year cycles. In your own experience, do you have any strong opinion either way on that?
I don't have a strong opinion. I suppose I can clearly see the pros and cons, as I'm sure you can too. And I think if accountability is a key interest, then there is I think a clear advantage of the 4-year cycle as a more gradual approach.
Right.
Why is that, Catherine?
Because of a sense, I suppose, that you've got then a record to defend at the end of 4 years, and you're all defending it. And if your party group loses, or if you're a hung council, if you end up, the voters don't want to defend your record, then it's easier for them to express that at the ballot box.
That's an interesting point. Other initiatives which have been suggested to us to increase potential citizen engagement and turnout in elections have been online voting. I don't know if your councillors discussed the potential of that at all?
No, nobody mentioned online voting.
Right, okay. The other one which was interesting is the idea of possibly lowering the voting age for local elections to 16. I don't know if you have any opinion on that. You're more than welcome to say no.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would generally be all for it. They clearly moved that direction in Scotland. To me, it would have made sense to do that for the Brexit vote. And I think it's something that can potentially increase engagement with a group of people who, potentially in a school environment, it's perhaps, there is a sense of quite a good time to catch people, where you can do more of that kind of civic education stuff. So I haven't heard many convincing arguments against lowering the voting age to 16.
You've just said that to one of the people in charge of the University Commission that last turned down lowering the voting age. So I like to think that I'm unconvincing in most walks of life. Thank you very much, councillors. Do we have any final questions?
No, thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Well, Catherine, thank you very, very much for giving so much of your time up. It's enormously generous, and more than that, being so enthusiastic and rich in your feedback to us. It really has been a very enjoyable hour or so, and enlightening to to our work, and I'm genuinely grateful, and we all are. Just to give you a sense about where we are going to go away, as I say, at the end of next month and begin work on a draft report. And we would be very grateful when we come to that point if we can contact you with our draft recommendations and elicit some feedback on our recommendations.
Yeah, no, I'd be really happy to. I mean, I think what it's a great commission, and covering lots of issues. But as I say, I think our report raised more questions than answers. So I think if you're coming through with some answers, then there'll be a real receptivity to that. So yeah, really look forward to the report. Well,
that's very kind of you to say, but we are very fortunate in that we can draw on such strong work such as the 21st Century Council report. So we're very grateful not only for your help today, but also just the wider contribution towards the debates that we're undertaking. But for now, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the term.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Bye all.
Bye. Take care. Bye. Bye. Bye.